Okay, we are going to look at our photo book since we're not doing this live. I'm going to do that here and we'll talk a little bit about it and then we'll go on to the bigger lecture, which is about the portrait assignment. So, here we go. Our photo book is called Matthew. It's by Kenneth Josephson. He was a Chicago, I think maybe he's still alive. I don't know. I saw him a couple of years ago and he wasn't dead because that would be weird if I went and saw him and he was dead. But saw him a couple of years ago in New York and he was definitely getting up there, but was still alive. So as far as I know, still out there doing his thing. This is a book that he made. I don't actually know. Let's see. It tells us. What does that say? Okay, well, this was published 2012. The project is definitely earlier because I knew these images, and that was long before 2012, back in the 1700s or whenever it was. I was studying photography. So the book is about his son, Matthew. Kenneth Josephson now has got to be in his 80s at least. But his son, Matthew, died when he was in his 20s, I believe, in a car crash. And this book, right, so there's an essay in the beginning of the book that I don't know, I suppose you can try to squint at and read. But he talks about how, as a photographer, right, and a parent, he's like, making pictures about this kid, and it's this thing, right? You're sort of like, speaking as a photographer and a parent, you're kind of trapped in this, like, it's kind of a cliche, but it's also really important. And so you want to make something that's interesting, but it's also like, as you're doing it, that it's kind of ridiculous. I don't know if he's having these thoughts. These are certainly the thoughts that I had. It's one of those things where it's like looking at vacation pictures, right? Or Thanksgiving dinner pictures, right? Like they're only interesting to you if you were there, right? If you want to make them interesting to other people, that's a lot harder. So there's part of that, right? But there's also this, like, he's a photographer, he's a really good photographer, this like urge to photograph. And so, he makes these photographs and they're really good and they're interesting and they're him exploring. This is his first child, his like this idea of being a parent, this idea of having a child, what all of that means. And then when he dies, um, it's this thing where now it's been, 40 years, 50 years. I guess not 50 years, long ass time. And so the child that he actually knew, right, the actual literal being, right, that is depicted in these pictures, that person has been sort of eroded by the constant viewing and reviewing of the photographs. And so I think it's a really interesting and kind of heartbreaking, to be totally honest, way of thinking about how portraiture not only depicts people, but can also, over time, sort of replace them. And this is something that photography sort of does, right? It's this sort of insidious thing that pictures do, where every time we look at them, we recall that memory, right? But we sort of re-see it, we rewrite it in the viewing. And so that memory, the original memory that we had back whenever the event occurs, that doesn't really exist anymore, right? That has been overwritten by these subsequent viewings and reviewings, imaginings and reimaginings. And so he talks about how the photograph, has kind of eaten the memory of his son, right? Now the thing that he has is the picture, and of course anybody would rather have the person than the picture, but he has the picture rather even than sort of the memories of the reality. Um, so I'm going to show you these pictures. They're beautiful pictures. I apologize for the sort of format of the slides. I thought I had in the sort of slide library, right? They're not fucking slides, right? I thought I had sort of more copy standy pictures, and I don't, so I shot these on a table. Right? I mean, they're so good, right? Like just the way that the water, right, sort of like forms this topographic line, right, around her stomach, right? Like, so good, right? Like, yeah, there's like naked pictures up one side and down the other, but this is really good, right? Babies, this picture over there, where kind of thinking back to this image, right here, the infant Matthew is assuming the same place in his shadow that he had sort of within her body, right? So it's this sort of like, him taking on this sort of role of having the child within him. And it's interesting too, to me at least, these ideas of like, I'm looking at these kind of like family snapshots, right? But they're by somebody famous. So like, do I think that they're better, or are they just better because they're in a book, right? Are they better because they're in a book and they have a famous name attached to them? I don't know. This picture is so good. It's the cover image. It's one of the more famous images, and that's his son holding up the Polaroid of the picture of him that his dad, Kenneth Josephson, has just taken. And it's sort of playing with some of Kenneth Josephson's themes of like pictures within pictures. In this image is the encapsulation of the idea of the passage of time, right? Because the Polaroid is taken, it exists, now he's holding that, so that Polaroid then is from the past, right? In the same way that we are looking at this picture, which is now also in the past. He's sort of like blocking his vision with the picture, which you can't get a much better metaphor for what Kenneth Josephson is talking about with the way that the portrait functions in kind of eating our memory. More pictures. Think about how these maybe are different than your regular snapshots. How are they the same? What do those things mean? How much of it is me telling you this guy's important? How much of it is this sort of impending but also in the past loss that we intellectually have in the back of our minds as we look at these pictures of this kid, right? We sort of know that he will die at some point after this picture is taken, even though at this point all of this has happened far in the past, which is part of that like time mind fuck that photography does. These are really good. These kind of remind me of the Dwayne Michaels picture where he's in the motel room and Johnny Cash is inside, and you can only see him because of where Dwayne Michaels is sort of blocking the glare on the window. There are other pictures in this book. I didn't take every single page spread in the book. But this is the last one, which again, it's like, oh, like really hard. But that's him sort of holding up in the same way that one might hold up a child, right? Holding up this picture that is the only thing that's left of the child that was. So that's your daily dose of sunshine and happiness. Kenneth Josephson, worthwhile looking him up. He is definitely of an earlier generation of photographers, right? All black and white, all film. Was working really hard to get photography accepted as a fine art form, and not in that euphemistic way that people say fine art when they really mean naked ladies. Um, so he was very important, both like as an educator, as a photographer, as a sort of community builder. Um, yeah, interesting guy. Made some good pictures. Chicago based. Worth worth knowing about, even though he is still part of that kind of established canon. He's a little bit on the fringes, because I think he's a little bit um, less interested in fame and fortune, perhaps, than some of the other people were, and more interested in the people around him. So there you go, Kenneth Josephson, and now on to the portrait project.